We love Classical Conversations.
Your organization is known worldwide, and we certainly appreciate every facet that you do.
I do believe in what you're doing because I've seen it in my family.
I'm so excited about all the things that, Robert, you guys do with Classical Conversations. It's been a huge blessing for our family.
Grateful for the work at Classical Conversations. You're a leader, and you have been in this movement for a long time.
I do feel like I have a debt of gratitude to you, your family, all of CC for just the fruit that has come from CC.
Appreciate all that you guys do, both through this wonderful podcast and also through Classical Conversations, which I am convinced is the best education resource out there. Thank you very much for all that you do for the cause of Christ and for our families and for our children. Really, really appreciate it.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another exciting episode of Refining Rhetoric. Today, I am welcoming Dr. Owen Anderson. He is a professor of philosophy and religion at Arizona State University, a faculty associate of philosophical theology at Phoenix Seminary, and a pastor of Historical Christian Church of Phoenix. His books include commentary on the Book of Job and the Book of Revelation, books on natural law and natural theology, and philosophy books aimed at a high school student audience. And he often works with charter schools, Classical Conversations, and homeschool families to prepare their children for the challenges to their faith they will face at universities. I think we've seen the research, something around 70% of kids in Christian schools walk away from the faith or no longer involved. So a very important topic that we're going to be talking about today. So Dr. Anderson, welcome to the show.
Yeah, I'm really glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, and it sounds like you do a lot. So what made you interested in philosophy and religious studies? Take us to how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, so, growing up in the church and interested in apologetics, especially as I got into high school. I went to a public high school, so I started meeting people from, mostly no religion or Mormons. Those are the two big ones. And so I started just wondering, how do I know what I think is true? These Mormon friends of mine at school, they believe what they believe because their parents told them, and I believe what I believe because my parents told me. And so that kind of launched me into apologetics, and I didn't realize there was a whole field you could major in college. When I found out there is, called philosophy, I said, that's what I want to do. And especially one night, my dad in high school, he took me to see William Lane Craig debate an atheist at Arizona State University. And it was a terrible debate in the sense that the atheist didn't even show up. Did terrible, mostly just making fun of mischaracterizations of Christianity. And William Lane Craig has his standard 5 points that he gives, and he went over those. But I just left and I said, hey, Dad, I want to do that kind of thing. I want to get into defending the faith and doing philosophy. So from there, I kind of didn't look back. I do feel bad for my parents because it's probably not what you want to hear. The defending the faith part is great, but you don't want to hear from your child, I'm going to get an undergraduate degree in philosophy, because they'll point out, well, there's no philosophy factories opening up in town. Where are you going to work? So but my parents, I'm joking though, because my parents are really supportive. And once you commit to that, you're kind of committing yourself either to philosophy or law, professor or a lawyer. And most of my colleagues that went into majoring in philosophy, the other students, end up as lawyers. And I went the way of the Jedi and became a professor.
Nice. Now, how does that work? Like being a Christian philosopher in higher academics? Because I mean, you look at the stats, 90% are left wing, and I'm sure a significant portion of those are atheist.
Yep.
And then there's you, the pariah.
I know. Well, that's what's happened more and more. It's always been that way in my career. Coming out of high school, I applied to some good Christian schools like Wheaton and Westmont and Seattle Pacific, and I got accepted, but I just couldn't afford it. And so I ended up going, the state school route. And so I've always been in that secular environment. And I realized pretty quickly that it was for me, meaning I'm not saying this for everybody, but it was for me that I want to be around the best objections to Christianity and learn how to refute them. I don't want to be in a setting where someone else is telling me what the objections are, but they don't agree with them either. And so they might be softening it a little bit, not giving the best representation. So it was kind of just like the Spartans. I got thrown out to be with the wolves. And if I live, I live. And if not, then I don't. So I've always kind of viewed it that way. And I think it's, if you have a kind of a good foundation in your faith, it's actually a good route. because you want to know what the other views say. But then as I became a professor, it was very clear to me early on that I was going to be discriminated against, both for my, being a white conservative man, and then that would be enough. But especially once you get into Christian and small o Orthodox Christian. So they might tolerate kind of a liberal Christian that's hard to even recognize as a Christian. But once you realize, okay, this guy actually believes the Bible is the word of God. He believes Jesus died and rose from the dead, the virgin birth, all those things. Okay, he's a weirdo. We're going to give him a harder time. So I had to do the same thing as everybody else in order to get tenure and promoted to full professor and publishing. I published books with Cambridge University Press, which is, top 3 press in the world for academics. So I had to do all those same things, but I was definitely, there's ways that you can be discriminated against that aren't things you can put down on paper, but you start to notice you're bypassed for most of the, in-group stuff. And I just used that I just said, well, good, I'm not going to be on the board of advisors. I'll just use that time to do extra reading and writing and research. So I didn't ever let it get to me or make me sour, but it's just noticeable. And it's a bit hypocrisy, because their whole thing is we're open to everybody and we don't discriminate. And it's like, no, that's just not true. You actually do the very thing you say you don't do.
Well, I think the documentation of the higher ed discrimination is plenty out there, and it's gonna be really interesting to see what happens with Donald Trump and his executive orders and all the things going on. It is going to be a fascinating 4 years ride that we're on.
Well, we've had real shakeups, because the first couple executive orders took away federal money for universities, and ASU is deeply embedded in DEI. I mean, I think they've gone further than other universities in making it part of their identity. And so it'll be very hard for ASU to kind of untwist those connections. So I'm watching colleagues just sort of do mental gymnastics as they freak out about, what are we going to do without DEI money? And so, we'll see what happens. I think they're hoping it'll be clogged up in the courts, and then it'll just be a 4-year thing, and we get back to something like Joe Biden.
Yeah. I don't know that it's going to work out for them that way.
I don't think it will. I think they'll try to clog it up in the courts. I think that's going to fail. And I think they got to buckle in for 8 years of JD Vance after the 4 years of Trump.
Yeah. If the Lord is that merciful to us as a country, we do not deserve it.
Yep.
All right. So they are kind of experiencing their own Job moment, but for opposite reasons that he experienced. So you have a commentary on the book of Job. What are some of the things that Christians should be learning from that book that we may not be?
The importance of natural theology. So what happens with Job is usually you'll find commentaries written about it focusing on Job just needs to learn to respect God. God is sovereign. God shows up at the end. He doesn't answer any of Job's questions. He just poses his own questions, which tells Job, be quiet and do what I tell you to do. And at most, it becomes kind of a devotional about how to be devoted to God. But I think that what it really does, why I call it a philosophical commentary, is I argue that it's the very first philosophy book. It's a dialogue, just like a Platonic dialogue, but it predates those. Even if you give it modern dating, which is like sometime in the 500s, it's still before Plato, let alone if you believe the traditional position of Job as he came before Abraham, after the flood, after Babel, before Abraham, before there's any people, any children of God. There's no Israel yet, no temple, no tabernacle, and no chosen people. So this is really a philosophical book given to us in inspired scripture, and it goes through the existential problem that you'll find everybody wrestles with. Whenever I've talked to an atheist, from the most intellectual to just kind of normal everyday atheist, they might start off with something like, physics proves that you can have a multiverse or something. But when you keep asking them questions, the reason they reject God is always some part of the problem of evil. And so you think about Stephen Hawking, right? He's significantly handicapped in this wheelchair, and he says he has all these great proofs that there is no God. But when it comes down to it, he just says, I can't believe in God because of my physical ailment. And so that's a problem that everybody faces, and Job faces it. And he has these 3 friends, and they have this pretty long philosophical dialogue. And his 3 friends each double down on the claim that he's committed some kind of what I would call fruit sin, meaning he's lusted after girls, he's worshipped an idol, he's cheated someone out of money, and he rightly defends himself. He says, I haven't done any of those things, and they keep going. They get worse and worse in their accusations. But then at the end of the book, what's pointed out to him is that you didn't do those things, but you did this. You justified yourself rather than God, and you haven't been seeking God as you should have. And so God shows up and he says, equip yourself like a man. And I like that because as a philosopher, it's interesting. What God means is be ready to answer philosophical questions, not let's get in a fight. Like when someone says, you got to be a man, you think, oh, we're going to get in a fist fight. But he means be a philosopher, think. And he begins at the very beginning. Where were you when I created the world? And it's important that he asks that because Job began asking, where's God? Why isn't God here? And so God flips the question on Job, where were you? And he begins with, I, God, am eternal, and I created the world, which had a beginning. And then he gets into some very specific details about creation, specific animals. Have you ever considered the wild donkey? And it's funny because in my part of Phoenix, we have a herd of wild donkeys that lives in the desert near us. And that verse comes to mind. Have you considered them and the uniqueness about them, or the ostrich, or the eagle, or the lion? And so God directs Job to consider how the works of creation reveal the glory of God. And at the end of that, Job confesses, I hadn't seen that before. I'd heard about you, but I'd never seen you, and I repent. And so I think Job gives this beautiful solution to the problem of evil right at the very beginning of human history, basically. And it's undervalued for that reason. People don't pick up on that. They don't see that. They think of it just as don't object to God or he'll show up and yell at you.
Is that where we've got an angry God out of? Is that one of the
It's very, They might just say, God just kind of got sick and tired of Job asking questions.
Yep. Now, the book of Revelations, I've read it. Well, it's one of the books I come back and read all the time. You've written a commentary on that. I know there's fierce debate in certain circles of Christianity. Are we post-mill? Are we pre-mill? Or e-mill? Or I don't know. I always just tell people, I don't know. I just know God's coming back for me probably in the next, 40 to 60 years at best. And so so my time here is shortened.
Get to work. That's a good attitude. Just get to the work. Do the work you've been given while you've got daylight.
Yes. So what's the book of Revelations? What is that really about?
Yeah. So what I do in this book is I try to approach it in a way that doesn't first and foremost divide up the audience in the ways you just said. Like this is going to be a book about this or that millennial view, but begin to approach it in ways that every Christian can agree on. And I think the thing that the book teaches us is that Christ is currently ruling, and he's ruling through his church. He's judging the nations, and he's going to conquer the nations through the Great Commission. So the nations are converted, so the whole earth comes to acknowledge God. And the way that story is told to us is first we get the letters to the churches, and we see how each of them has some problems. There's two that don't, but 5 of them do. They've got some issues, but they always end, each letter ends with, to him who overcomes. There's going to be victory over sin. And then having set the stage with those, we get 7 different visions given to John. Each vision is about the same thing. It records how Christ conquers, is victorious. And so, for example, one of them involves the horsemen that ride out, and they bring plague, famine, war, and death on the world. And those things are a judgment on the nations, but they're also a call to turn to God. And so the whole vision ends up with that victorious Christ. And then we move on to the second vision. So what we're getting here are 7 visions of Christian history, how Christ is ruling to defeat his enemies and ends up victorious.
We do win in the end, so that is good to know. What do you think is the biggest misconception about Revelations that Christians have?
Well, I think since the Darby Scofield Bible, and then with the onset of kind of TBN approach to the news, the idea of Revelation is that it's predicting current events specifically. So you'll go to a passage, and that passage is about the current nation of Iran threatening the current nation of Israel. And you'll say, oh, okay, that's in Revelation here. And so we must be getting closer to the end. And I think that kind of approach is mistaken. It's not doing that. And the generation of World War One did that, and they were wrong. The generation of World War Two did that, they were wrong. The Cold War generation did that, and they were wrong. So it should have been disproven enough, but it keeps happening that way. But it also takes our eyes off the fact that the story in Revelation isn't about us being defeated. It's about us Christians, being victorious. And so you said at the beginning, you've got this work to do, and that's the right attitude, versus saying, hey, it's all going to end. What's the point of doing anything? Let's just kind of hunker down and wait for Jesus to return. And that's created a situation where Christians really have lost the culture, and they've become the tail of the culture rather than the head.
Yeah, the holy huddle strategy has not done anything to increase the biblical worldview of our society.
Yeah.
There's the one version of like, if we just got all of religion away, the world would be a better place. And what we found is we've got Supreme Court justices that don't even know the difference between a boy and a girl.
Well, they're not biologists, right? So they don't.
Yeah. So you're saying it has something to do with biology then? That's what she's really saying. So we definitely see with the trans madness and all those sorts of things going on that is not the case, that the world does not become a better place when Christianity stays out of
the gospel. It really becomes a nightmare. But so in one way, Job is saying, hey, this is God's world, and Revelation's saying, and it's Christ's world specifically, that Christ is ruling it. And so from those, as Christians, and what we want to teach our children is that kind of optimistic viewpoint. It doesn't mean we're not going to have persecution. We're told we will. But even the persecution is part of the victory and part of overcoming.
In a world filled with confusion, clarity begins with God's Word. At Boyce College, truth isn't just something they study, it's the foundation of everything they do. Located in Louisville, Kentucky, Boyce College equips students to know the truth and live in it with maximum faithfulness. At Boyce, every degree program is grounded in Scripture, ensuring students are prepared both spiritually and academically for whatever God calls them to. With 30 credit hours of core Bible and theology courses, students don't just gain knowledge, they're shaped by a biblical worldview while being mentored by a faculty who are disciple makers committed to investing in the next generation of Christ-centered leaders. The best way to experience Boyce College is to visit, walk the campus, meet the professors, and see what makes Boyce College so different. Learn more and schedule your visit at www.boycecollege.com/classical-conversations. That's boycecollege.com/classical-conversations. Now, back to the show.
Yeah, no, I think, my daughter, she's in gymnastics and she just had a really bad meet, and, it's not necessarily persecution, but disappointment and not living up to expectations and things like that. But, from an athletic standpoint, every athlete I know is, if they're successful, it's because they've overcome, right?
Yep.
So overcoming persecution. You think about India or China or whatever, one country now has the, fastest growing number of Christians, while we, I don't know. I'm optimistic that we've bottomed out here in the United States, and that's the only way we can go now is up, because our pupils might be full, but they're full of people who have no idea what the Bible actually says about living life and governance and the spheres of influence and all of those things. So one of the things that our country was founded on is this idea of natural law. And it's something that the courts have seemed to get away from over the last 20 or 30 years. So, tell us, what is natural law? How does that differ from what we're seeing in our courts today?
Yeah, so natural law means that God gave us a moral law in the very structure of reality. And a moral law is the law that guides our choices. So it tells us, what ought I to do to get what is good? Meaning, you can break the moral law, but when you do that, you don't get what is good. And for some people, that makes them say, well, then it's not really a law. It's not like gravity. You can't disobey gravity. But it is a law in this sense. It says, if you don't do these things, you don't get to the good. There are consequences. And so the way it could be summarized is, the day you eat, you'll surely die, or the wages of sin is death. So the moral law is our instruction, our guide to what is good. And it's in the very nature of things. That's why it's called natural law. You don't need the 10 commandments written for you to know the content of the 10 commandments. You can know that you should love God, your creator, that you should love your neighbor. You can know you shouldn't steal, shouldn't lie, shouldn't murder, all of them. And so that idea is important because Christians can say there are a lot of things that we ought to know about God that we don't know. That's how Paul begins Romans, right? In Romans 1:18 through 21. You should have known God. You should have followed the law, and you're not, which is why you need Christ. And that's how it's set up in Romans. And that's the same gospel message that we're teaching today. So the United States is founded on some really important claims in the Declaration of Independence about God and our rights. And if we leave those behind, then where are we getting these rights? And where are we getting the law? So it's not just that God made the law, but that you need to be able to show because we're rational beings, certain things follow from that you should do. And the current culture's just kind of crazed enjoyment of aberrant sexuality is not living as a rational being. It's living as just a brute animal. I mean, even the animals don't do some of the things that the humans are doing.
Yeah.
Animals don't amputate healthy parts of their body.
That's very true and very blunt and very accurate. It is it'll be interesting to see what history says 30 or 40 years from now about some of the things that we have done to ourselves.
Well, I think one of my books that your audience might be most interested in is my book titled Reason, Logic, and the Knowledge of God, where I kind of cover this stuff about nature and what we can know from natural theology or natural law. But it's meant to be a logic textbook for the high school level. And I go over just kind of what is reason, what is logic, what is Aristotelian logic, what are some modern examples of logic? And then I use logic to go over proofs for God's existence, to show why logic is important and apply it to how we use logic to know God.
Yeah, I have an industrial engineering degree, but actually was only I think 2 classes short of a philosophy minor when I went in school because it was just kind of fascinating taking logic, philosophy, and hearing the crazy ideas because I was at a public university, Clemson, that a lot of the people had or are supposed to, or just the probate mind, what it's willing to accept.
The same thing. Well, and I think that's really because I'm involved with classical conversation students here in Phoenix. And I think one question that parents often have for me is, is it safe to send my child to a state university? The state universities, their very purpose is to provide an affordable university degree for all of us who can't afford more than that. And so you don't want to simply say, get rid of them 100%. You need to reform them. But right now, what they're not doing is they're not serving the purpose they're made for, because the parent who needs to use that option for their student is saying their child, you read the stats for us, 70% loss of faith, into the lion's den. And that's not right. That's not what we're paying our taxes for. That's not why these universities were founded. And so I think one of the really important things to talk to parents about is first, know your child, and then second, prepare your child. So not every child has a strong enough faith at that age to go through state university. And that's the parents' knowledge. That's why it's so important that parents are the ones who are involved or are in charge of their own children's education. They're the ones who best know. But then if you do have a child who you think this child's got a pretty solid faith, make sure they're prepared. When they're in high school, bring up all the kinds of challenges they're going to face in a safe, family environment, because then when they get there, there's no surprise. Like, oh, I never thought that you'd say Christians are the oppressors. I never heard that before. But say, yeah, I know. I went over that already. That's the silliest view I've ever heard. Christians have liberated the world from all kinds of slavery, both spiritual and physical. And so they're ready for that kind of thing. Because the students I know who've lost their faith went into it without that. They got, so to speak, caught off guard by some crafty professor who brought up a challenge like that. And they didn't know, and they felt kind of like, I guess maybe I've been tricked or something. The Bible is against homosexuals. It hates homosexuals. And so that's what I recommend to parents is just be ready to train your kids. You need to be familiar with what are these professors saying, and then prepare your kids for that.
Well, that was what I was about to get to. So I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, you said that your teacher at Arizona State University, DEI, is kind of intertwined in there. I would suspect that you're not as the forefront of DEI as you'd like to think you are. There's a lot more schools that are like that and freaking out over different ideas. But yeah, so what are some things like that parents can do? I mean, you mentioned like having these questions, but I don't, I'm a parent with 3 little young kids, and I mean, I'm having to figure out answers to questions that are just unfathomable to to think that you'd even have to answer like these things. So, I mean, a parent might not even not know what questions are being, asked of them. So what are some things that parents and kids can do? You mentioned reading your book together. Like, what are some other?
This is one reason I started my Substack, which is just Dr. Owen Anderson at Substack, Substack, and that Substack's just dedicated to this kind of thing. So I know mostly focus on ASU, but it's going to be the same across state universities in terms of what the professors teach. And so I just look and show parents, this is what ASU is doing. And the feedback I get from parents is almost always, wow, I didn't know it was that bad. We all knew universities are liberal. I didn't know it was that bad. And so I recommend your audience, go to that Substack and look at it. And I've got a couple years now of stuff you can go through. So ASU's Honors College tries to attract students like CC students because they're very prepared. They're very bright. Most of the CC students I've met, I say all of them, are way, way more advanced than anybody in their public school colleagues. So they want an honors college like ASU's wants to attract them. But what ASU's Honors College won't tell the parents on sales day is we actually have events about the benefits of witchcraft and why your daughters should practice witchcraft. And we have events on dispelling the myths around polyamory being harmful, to teach that it's a good thing for your children to do. So that really changes it. On the parent day, they'll tell you about how, we study the great books and we have these wonderful discussions about ideas. The reality is what I'm telling you about on Facebook, and I post the flyers, I post the links, so parents know I'm not making it up. This is what their honors professors are doing.
So you're on the inside. I mean, do you feel like a spy, or do you feel like I mean, obviously you're very public about it. So do you feel like a protected informant because you've got your, credentials and they can't really fire you unless you do something really, really, really dumb, and you kind of can figure that out. What's it like being on the inside?
Well, that's a great question because it is like being an informant. I think often of Joshua and Caleb spying out the land. And so I'm trying to give an accurate report of how vile it is. But I also want to be like Caleb and Joshua and say, but we can take this. I mean, the Lord is on our side, because I also view myself as a professor who wants to just do what universities do. Let's read the great books. Let's discuss and debate those ideas. Let's learn how to use logic and think. And I don't want to see that that's lost to history. I want to restore our universities to that. So I'm also thinking about that in terms of reforming. So I do get lots of nasty emails and comments. Most of them are anonymous, so I know they're probably my colleagues because they don't want to have their name on them. But it's like, I can weather that. That's not a big deal compared to protecting students and warning parents about what's out there. And I think we can raise up a generation who says, I'm not going to take this anymore. I'm not going to sit through a class I'm paying for where I'm supposed to be, you're talking about the great books and you're going on about your sexual theory.
Is there any methods for like a student listening to this and this professor just goes off on something that's not even relevant to the topic being discussed? This is a mechanical engineering class. Why are we talking about transgenderism or
100%.
Something like that? Is like, what should students be armed with?
Yeah, I would recommend first and foremost, document everything. Take screenshots, audio record the lecture if you need to, save all the emails. So document everything. And then ASU was forced by our state legislator to start a hotline for students in that situation where they can call and report it. So I don't know if every state has that, but probably they have something like that. Because students are always worried about it hurting their grade. I don't want to go to my dean about it because then the dean will tell the professor and the professor will give me a bad grade. So it's an anonymous hotline. And then there's people like me where I also keep things anonymous. So send this stuff to me and I'll be the one that posts about it without your name or anything and expose this professor. That's what TPUSA was doing for quite a while. They had a professor watch list, which would do this exact thing. And I think it still exists. And in fact, just last year, they wanted to start up the good professor list. And I'm happy to say I'm number 1 on there. I was the first one they put on there as a recommended professor. So that's always a resource too, but it has to be kept up to date. I'm not sure how much they've kept it up to date as they've moved on to other projects. So there might not be like current professors that you need to be warned about. So I would say to the students, be bold. It's your education. You're paying for it. Your parents are paying for it. You're investing your time into it. Don't let it be stolen from you by some guy who wants to talk about his radical leftist ideology.
What about what are some non school things that they can do? Like if you're a Christian student and you're matriculating to a government institution, or even some of these Christian institutions are suspect at best nowadays. What can Christian students be doing at these different institutions? Because eventually, even if you send them to a good Christian school, college, they're still going to get into the real world. They're going to work for, they might work for a Christian company, and there's more and more of us. There's over 4,000 Christian companies now that are explicitly Christian and practicing our work that way. But they'll probably find themselves in a Fortune 50 company or 500, and they'll eventually have to deal with the sin of the world in a more tangible way. Hopefully when they have the maturity and the intellectual background to handle it well. But what are some things specifically that they can do at university to give themselves the strength to fight through this?
Yeah, so what I always recommend to students, it's parallel to what I said to the parents: be prepared. So for the students, you need to be prepared and not be naive about the reality of sin. No professor is going to say to you, I hate Jesus. They're going to say, oh, I love Jesus. He was so great. He taught homosexuals to practice homosexuality. So they're going to be cunning and crafty like that. They're not going to just come out with their hatred. And they're not going to tell you, I'm a wolf who wants to destroy your faith. But I've sat in faculty meetings where faculty joke about destroying the faith of Christians. They think that's fun and something to laugh at. So just know that's what these professors are like when they're talking about you, and be prepared for that. They're going to be nice and friendly to you in person, of course. But then the other thing is have a mentor or more. You've got to have an older person in your life. Could be your parents, that's fine. But sometimes when you're a young adult, you have other mentors who you can go to, and they've maybe navigated these same waters. I had 2 or 3 really good Christian professors who got me through my education, through my PhD, who I could go to and say, man, I'm dealing with this nonsense right now. What should I do? And so it's really important to have mentors like that in your life. And then, of course, be in church. You got to be an active Christian. You got to be worshiping God and have, friends your age from church that you're working with. So that kind of vital Christian life will not only get you through it, I think you'll thrive.
It's definitely possible, and it can be done, and it has to be intentional. And we want to raise children who are going to live their lives intentionally. Absolutely. So I just thank you so much for being on the show today. I'm going to give you the last word. What do you want to say to Christian parents? And then, what do you want them to remember from this podcast? And then give us the websites again and your books and where we can purchase those so we can arm ourselves with them.
Yeah, so if you're a parent and you're listening to this, you're already committed to giving your child a great education. You're interested in that. So you're working from K to 12 to provide them with this. Don't let some college professor come along and try to steal that from you. Be very intentional about college also. And that doesn't mean your student doesn't go to a state university, but just that they're prepared and they have the resources needed if they do. So feel free to reach out for me. My page is, like I said, go to substack.com and look up Dr. Owen Anderson, and you can message me there, any questions or concerns you have. And again, you'll also see all these resources I posted. But then if you just want to follow me, I'm also on X, same thing, Dr. Owen Anderson, Dr. Owen Anderson. And I do just more broad sort of things, not just focused on ASU. And then I have a YouTube channel also where I do interviews with sort of leading philosophers and theologians, just trying to ask them interesting questions that you or your kids might like. And if you go to Amazon, I have an author page where you'll see the books that we discussed today on Job or Revelation or my textbook on logic.
All right. Well, we'll put all those links in the show note as well. In case you didn't get those written down, you can just go to our website, refiningrhetoric.com, or go to our YouTube page, or listen on your favorite podcast channel. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you, Dr. Anderson, for joining us, lifting the curtain on college and what are some of the things we can do as parents to get our kids ready for the world and the work that the Lord has for them. So thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thanks for having me here.
All right, everyone, be sure to share this episode with a friend. Subscribe on YouTube. We're almost at 10,000. We might be over 10,000 subscribers now. Every little bit helps. We got to break through the algorithm because the globalists do not want to hear what Dr. Anderson or I think, because we are trying to give you what the Bible says. And thank you so much. Share this episode with a friend. And until next time, God bless.
Thank you for listening to Refining Rhetoric with Robert Bortons. Want more? Make sure to subscribe so you won't miss an episode. You can also follow us on social media to continue the conversation, and visit classicalconversations.com/rhetoric to find out how you can join a local homeschool community.